Afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Norbury. I sit within the sustainability team of Northwest and Central in Network Rail. I'm a hydrologist by background, chartered hydrologist, and I've worked in flood risk management for many years, and most recently as an adaptation specialist within Network Rail. I also work in the Department for Business as a contractor, looking at adaptation and resilience with a broader lens, focusing on some of the other wider threats out there, such as pandemics, cyber security, economic security, all which are quite topical in the current era. Today's presentation will be about climate adaptation, and I guess it's probably just a story so far from my point of view in the railway, but looking back also in terms of the past work I've done. So appreciate here today, we've probably got quite a broad church of subject matter experts. So whilst I've worked extensively with civil and mechanical engineers, I'm not an engineer. I'm a chartered water environment manager. And I guess to start with, I think I thought I'd put this slide in today, given that it's hot, and the Met Office released a report today to basically say that the probability of days over 40 degrees Celsius is now 50-50 in any given year. And if we remember back to the 2022 heat and the impacts that had on the rail network, then that is a cause for concern. But also, to make it real and personal, I've included this graphic. So the background graphic is the blues. This is temperature change since the 1800s, from way back in the 1800s to today. And this is just to show that I work in the space of adaptation. So if we woke up tomorrow and miraculously all the greenhouse gases were cut out the atmosphere, we've still got some inbuilt shocks coming at us to deal with, and we have to sort of make that resilience measure to avoid the disruption, such as flood defences, nature-based solutions, rail at SEN 60 or continuous weld, which is more resilient to extreme heat. And I think this is just a point to the fact that really, if we go for a high growth and emission scenario, we're going to get much hotter and much more heat in the world's system. The atmospheric system will drive more water vapor, more intense downpours, but also some of the challenges elsewhere. But whereas if we go forward on stripping carbon emissions out of the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, we can curb that, and we can actually try and reset things. And I think this diagram is really important because climate change is personal, right? So I was born in 1989, so my experience of extreme heat will now be different to someone who is born in 2020. And I can think of several friends who are in the process of having babies, etc. And if you're born in the 50s, you're going to experience a more mild climate. And that's about people there, but it could equally be about assets on the rail system. And, this is why climate, what's my why? I think it goes way back. I think I remember the 2012 flooding in Newcastle, and just the sheer ferocity of that Thunder Thursday when lightning struck the Tyne Bridge, and just the devastation of that caused. And really climate change strikes at the heart of just how vulnerable the fabric of life is, really. And this is my local running club, and it is right next to the River Mersey, which on New Year's Day breached its banks and created widespread disruption. And it's affected the sports club. But wind that forward to today, other than a couple of weeks ago in the northwest of England, we really haven't had that much rain, and the water companies are being challenged now to conserve supplies. So what's that got to do with the railway? Okay, so I live somewhere in this general area, but the River Mersey flows down here, and we have this freight line. I think it's New Mills to Cheadle Branch freight line. I may be corrected on that, running here. And the defence is in blue, and the bridge, the very old historic bridge crossing the rivers here, and there's all these properties that have had flood warnings in the past and are at flood risk. But actually, what happened in the New Year's Day flooding is the embankment overtopped and water came on, and it didn't enter onto the freight line, but in a bigger event could well have done. And actually, if we retreated this flood bank all the way back to make space for water. We could protect properties downstream, other critical national infrastructure like the national grid, and slow the flow and give property level resilience for these properties, and also a level of resilience to ourselves too. And I've actually got a master's student at Liverpool University looking at that right now, and I'm due to catch up with them tomorrow. So yeah, just try to put that in the here and now. And I guess a slide today just talking about climate change resilience in the railway. And so this is published information, and either feel free to call it out or put it in the chat, but just an open question as to an estimate, and there's no such silly answer, so feel free to be bold, an estimate of the cost of extreme weather on the railway in terms of Schedule 8 payments to the train and freight operating companies since 2006. So that's a delay we pay where TOCs or FOCs can't access the infrastructure for flooding or other issues. So if you could post what you think that might be as a cost for those nearly 20 years in the chat, that would be great. Or feel free to call something out. And I've got silence. Is anyone willing to hazard a guess as to what the cost may be? Richard, do you want to hazard a guess or not? I don't want to put you on the spot too much.
No, I can't remember.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So the cost is £5 billion since 2006-07. So that is more than the entire 5-year funding settlement, for instance, for Wales and Western. So it's considerable. And I think the point I'm at, and in North West and Central, so London to Gretna, we are part of that picture. So this is published data, but these are the costs, and that graph is going the wrong way. That is money that we could spend on doing good stuff. But I think the important thing to say is the resilience is in our hands, and it is within our gift to invest to save when it comes to climate change, to avoid those costs and also increase efficiency sometimes. So really the three themes here are, why climate change in the railway. I think most people know about the Carmont tragedy, but also in addition to that, this is Haddiscosis, the embankment washout under a passenger train in Norfolk. And climate change really affects the efficiency, performance, and safety on the railway, which is what we're held to account on. And I guess that tunes into reputation and trust. And it's it's not a given that we've got trust to run that system. It's under a license with the government, and that's why it's really important. And whilst this was in Norfolk, this could have equally been on the Mersey, on that freight line I mentioned earlier, or somewhere else on the West Coast Main Line South. So everything is connected, I'd say, and that's really important to remember. So I guess my background, so this is me in Bolton, and this is a leaky dam. And so my background is as a hydrologist, but working specifically in something called natural flood management. So down here in the distance, you probably can't see it, it's Greater Manchester. And that floods, and the Smith Hills estate was sold by the council to the Woodland Trust. Then they planted 130,000 trees, and I was part of the natural flood management there, installing 44 different measures. And the community downstream is shown as being at flood risk. So about 50 or so properties at risk in the 1 in 100-year event. And basically, this is Dave Brown in the Environment Agency and Andy, who the then ranger at the Woodland Trust, and we worked to build these leaky dams to hold up floodwater in the landscape. So 12,000 modelled cubic meters of water would spill out into the community at flood risk downstream in a 1 in 100-year event. And then so they basically said, right, well, that's too much water at the same time in one location. Let's look at the basin that drains down to there, just like a sink basin and a plug hole. If you imagine the community at risk being that outlet, that plug. I've worked upstream to install 12,000 cubic meters of attenuation in that landscape, and some really good evidence about that, because at the time, I think that it wasn't really funded too much, and there was a lot of, well, does it really make a difference? And I published a paper in the Institution of Civil Engineers, Journal of Hydroecology, and this is a journal paper in the Journal of Hydrology where on a river reach scale we monitored this before we put everything in, and then we found that discharge data showed an average peak reduction of 27%. And that's a sort of difference. If it was occurring downstream in the community, that's a sort of difference that is the avoidance of flood, and that can apply to the railway as well. But crucially, there's actually a paper coming out, an article coming out this week in The Conversation. It's also alleviating drought risk, which is really topical at the moment, because the water's not just running off the land, it's actually staying on the land for longer and recharging groundwaters. And my colleague at the University of Liverpool, Neil MacDonald, is writing and citing this paper in that article to show actually that there is a benefit. And I guess why did all that come about? So this is somewhere in Cumbria, and they built the flood defence, overtopped that, so they put some glass panels on the top of the flood defence, and I think it's since overtopped that. And also they had a log smash into one of these glass panels and shot loads of water through. So it was a bit of a wake-up call when things like Storm Desmond in 2015 and other things were going on, that how high can you realistically build this thing in a town which has sort of great heritage value and tourist value. And actually you can store up problems by doing this, because you kind of create sediment in the channel bed, so you're sort of in an arms race building the defence against an increasing water level. And it is the case that abroad in places like China, but also in the UK, we've have perched our rivers up in the air because of this approach. So I guess, sea floods this area down here, but also, we have the river upstream, so it's B, where we could put like big wetlands in, and then A, where we can do storage in the hills. And that's really where I kind of said, well, if there's too much coming through here, what about up here that's covered in sheep and everything else, and there's barely a tree in sight? Can we look to slow store, intercept floodwater? So my background has been working with a huge variety of partners to co-deliver nature-based solutions across all those things that you can see on the screen there, and to support government in the guidance in relation to that work. And crucially on the railway, we've got things like, if you were to search Eden Rivers Trust River Petteril scheme, we've got a scheme looking to move a river from an earthwork at the moment to Brent Scour, and that builds on past work such as Thrimby Grange, a river leaf scheme where we did that just north of Penrith, and also where we have places like Shap and T-Bay on the West Coast Main Line North. This might be a valuable technique to reduce risk. And why would I say that? Because if you think about certain challenges like cross drainage, actually putting one flow pathway perpendicular to another, making it turn at a right angle, is quite a challenge for water. It generally doesn't like to do that, and actually slowing it up in the catchment might make more sense, and it might be more financially efficient to do so if you've got willing landowners and a partnership approach. So I guess, what is climate change? I guess climate is what you expect and weather is what you get. These are stolen from Wales and Western, I think, region, and we've got a huge network of observation systems throughout the planet, and subject matter experts in the UK like the Met Office, industry leading in their work, the National Oceanography Centre, Committee on Climate Change, National Infrastructure Commission. They've changed their name now to NISTA. But real subject matter experts, and they use those sensors there to detect changes in the earth. And this is just in observational terms, that basically seeing more greenhouse gases, more ocean warming, more sea level rise, more higher temperatures, now reaching about 1.5 degrees pre-industrial temperature, more warming in the atmosphere, ice melting, cherry blossom change, humidity. And that's crucial because there's heat, but there's also humidity and solar intensity as aspects which can make assets suffer, but also people as well. And so that's just to get a bit of a past look. And that past trend is used to inform representative concentration pathways. I wish I didn't call them that, but high or low growth emission scenarios for emissions. So we use those scenarios in Network Rail and other infrastructure operators use those to project climate change into the future. So effectively, days more above 40 degrees C more probable, precipitation events over 30 millimeters per hour, increasing fivefold by the century's end, so more monsoon-like rainfalls, a metre of sea level rise, changing wind speeds, and all that has impact on the rail infrastructure, as this slide shows, from rail buckling, bridge scour, track flooding. Got Dawlish over there, but you could equally have a Cumbrian coastal line in that photo, and things blowing onto the tracks. So, and recently we had Storm Erwin, basically closing the West Coast main line north of Preston. And so I think we should be doing climate adaptation in projects, because it should just be like any other risk assessment. If there's a climate risk there should be a control in relation to that risk. And crucially, climate adaptation is really now the law. So the new financial disclosure rules apply to big companies and they have to report them in their annual returns. But also the environmental permitting regulations, which apply to things like main river permits or infrastructure operations, like certain types of generators or waste disposal, they require a climate risk assessment and controls. And what we are seeing is this is the uptick in climate change lawsuits being applied to companies. And some of the penalties for failure are these on the slide. So asset failure, increased costs, cascading risks, so interdependency, like if our infrastructure fails, then what about, I don't know, defence or energy generation, which have to move materials via the line or often move materials via the line, policy and regulation, and reputational damage and responsibility. And this is it's a really good paper, this climate risk assessments must engage with the law. So if there's anyone in the supply chain here, this is it's really topical as to why we should be implementing adaptation measures, really. And this is just an example from the River Tyne and this is not a rail bridge, but it just underlines the climate change permit risk assessment requirement. So this is the big flood that came through and the scaffolding was still on the bridge, and a series of properties flooded nearby, and the allegation was that this had impeded the passage of flood flow through that channel and increased floodwater levels and consequently increased flooding to those properties. And that was subject to a Section 19 investigation of the Flood and Water Management Act by the Environment Agency. And, clearly there may be some liabilities associated with the infrastructure operator for potentially, in that instance, not having suitable or effective measures in place to demount that scaffolding with a flood. I appreciate everything can't be predicted, but what's the plan on a page? And wasn't too close to that, but I was aware of it when I worked in the Environment Agency. So, the permitting requirements are in relation to temporary works like this, but also permanent works. If you've got a design life for 1 in 60 years, for 60 years, for instance, or 120 years, is it going to actually last with climate change? So I guess to the audience, I guess what you can do about it is identify climate risks, hazards, and implement control measures to those risks. So far as reasonably as low as reasonably practicable, and so far as reasonably practicable. And there's hazard, vulnerability, asset exposure, got engineering codes, zoning, environmental standards. We have ISO 14000 suite of standards. ISO 14090 is the adaptation pathway standard, but there's other ones that exist out there. And if we don't do the adaptation bit, we have a risk threshold, and the status quo just goes straight through that threshold, and the safety, the efficiency, and performance gets impacted. But actually, if we take sustainable decisions, we stay on the white path, we stay on the path here, which is sustainable and safe, and don't stray off into the unsustainable pathway. And I guess that's what I'm doing with colleagues about it, is doing adaptation pathways and planning for the future in relation to locations. And I'll come on to how that adaptation pathway approach applies, for instance, in somewhere like Carlisle, but effectively it looks at today and into the future and looks at the whole suite of options that can be taken in relation to an asset to keep it resilient and safe into the future. And just back to a safe railway, this is the Carmont derailment and some drawings that I've got from various places. I think the rail engineer websites and RAIB in this case. So lots of water running off, various factors at play here. I'm not saying it is solely climate change related. The RAIB report sets all that out, but actually you've got quite an improved bit of pasture here running into the crest drain. And there was intense downpour event. You can see these field and the overland flow routes. Could it be the case that we could have ourselves or agri-environment consultants put in a bund like this with a pipe through, and this is in Northumberland. So when the intense storm comes through, actually it holds up the flood flow. And if you do that enough times, then it can reduce flood risk, as I was setting out earlier in relation to the work I'd done in Bolton. And that work in Belford and Northumberland in 2015 won the IC Robert Stevens Award. So just, multiple things at play here, but actually if NFM were in here, how could it have been different? We don't know. It's speculation, but just a thought and observation. So in Northwest and Central, the adaptation pathways approach is built upon the principles of good asset management. So critical assets and alignment with the company policy, but basically we're taking some of the most impacted lines and developing resilience plans for the future. So we've already had a workshop in Carlisle with the Environment Agency, and this week we also had another workshop for Lancaster, for the Scots border, with engineering colleagues, partners and stakeholders. September we've got a workshop on the Cumbrian coastal lines, and we've got future workshops on the Eastern Throat and elsewhere, and that's about creating discrete business cases for resilience. So this is the West Coast Main Line North. It's got Hess Bank, where it's at coastal risk, Sharp and T-Bay. It's got Carlisle, and then the Esk Viaduct, which seems to suggest in the future that water may get onto the track. You look at the flood modelling, and again, you look at places like T-Bay, and you've got the runoff and earthwork challenges here. But again, in that landscape on Loopsfell, the land that's draining down and showing to present flood risk to the railway, could we actually put things like ponds in, which capture flood flow and slow the flow off intensively drained moorland? And again, Shap we saw in the photo there earlier, but could we look to put in things like wooden fences, so in dry flow, and most of the 95% not doing anything, and in flood flow capturing flood peak. And this is really intensively grazed pasture, so it's nibbled to an inch of its life. More damaged grassland produces more sediment, more runoff, and actually if we could get some longer grasses on these buffer zones, that might help network rail out. The difference can be infiltration time of 7 seconds to 20 minutes. So ultimately, we want that really fast infiltration of water. We want the deeper routes, more water to go in the ground, not run off and into the cutting or go on and flood the town itself. I guess this is global heating, and fires have caused us a huge headache. So the University of Birmingham have analysed Network Rail records to find that there's been 35,000 fire incidents since 2006, resulting in delay costs of 207 million. And there's been about 14,000 fires within 30 metres of the railway since 2010. And that's got close to places like the Trans-Pennine route. And this year we've seen a record year in terms of fires, both line side, but areas over 30 hectares or larger being burnt. Fires around Newport to Cardiff on the Highland line where the Jacobite steam train runs. And so University of Birmingham have done some really good mapping on polygons of burnt areas, but also points of fires, and put that into maps. And actually, in terms of rail operations, that's quite crucial, because we need to think carefully about steam train operations and vulnerability of earthworks and other things. The outlook at the moment from the Met Office 3-month forecast is for it to be hot, more probably more hot than the average compared to the baseline, and so removing those sources of ignition is going to be crucial, and that can span operations in relation to the railway, such as steam train operations, rail grinding, vegetation management, things like feeder stations, electrification of fixed plants. So actually cable routing and troughing, and then the materials used in the railway, such as sleepers and other things, and the mapping and modelling that the University of Birmingham has done has been really important. And let's not forget, back to safety, that in 2022 in Spain, if you go online, it's quite a scary video, but this train goes into a fire, and how do we warn against that? There's new early warning system tools out there like Fire Insight and other things. So MetDesk supply our forecast, and that was a subject of conversation yesterday in terms of their fire index work on the daily forecast. How does that apply and prevent people being subject to risk on the network? And this is a road, Greenfield over Lancashire, Yorkshire Moors, where there's videos of people saying, "Oh, my dashboard's really hot," and flames either side of the car, so potentially shouldn't have been there. And the same thing could conceivably apply on the railway. So really important to have our early warning systems, but our longer term adaptation approach, our resilience. So Southern Scottish electricity networks here showing around a substation, grass, wetland, swale around it, rather than potentially vegetation around feeder stations. And this is just some of the outputs of the University of Birmingham showing actual events, actual fires on the West Coast Main Line South, and then future predicted fires showing a real uptick in the future. So in terms of flame length, height and intensity, real causes for concern. But all isn't lost. Climate risk doesn't have to equal climate catastrophe. I think the work around natural flood management in the UK has shown that holding water in the landscape is a good thing. The Flow Partnership are an international charity for which I'm a member, an associate, if you like, and they've done work in Africa and India to hold water in the landscape, to rejuvenate lands and make sure the actual vegetation isn't dead vegetation. Is full of as much moisture as possible. And that can link into our approach to biodiversity net gains. There's a requirement in planning for any new development to have 10% gains, 10% more biodiversity, greenery, post-development than was there before. And for non-local authority developments, Network Rail is committed to 4% gain by the end of CP7. So where there's multiple challenges, there can be not single issue, single solution measures, but multiple issue, single solution approaches, which can drive resilience. And going back to the wet end of the spectrum, looking at flood risk, Carlisle's really been damaged and through the history from flooding, and you've got some interesting watercourse routes through there. Basically, we've actually lost a lot of our substructure flow in that area over the years. So things like this culvert's now being filled in, and so is this one, and that actually releases this trapped flood water, which you can see in the flood map here, wearing off, presenting scour issues also here. It's trapped that behind there, backed up this channel, aggravated flooding of the railway line down there. But we also have gaps in our defences, and coupled with that, the flood peaks in the rivers observed since 1500s are increasing. And locally, we can see also that the causal chain of climate change is resulting in increased rainfall intensity and increased peak river flow elsewhere. And this is crucial to sort of observe that the northwest in England is both where some of the highest observations of observed increased flood peak have been observed, and increasing rainfall intensity, but in the future, the highest addition in peak flow in the future. So these events you can expect that this graph is going to continue up, and you could arguably say that's a line of safety or reasonable risk threshold, and it's going beyond that, and that's why adaptation is important. And this is investor safe, because where good colleagues have done good work, like putting 19 lokes, 5 FSPs on elevated platforms, that meant between storm Kira and Dennis and Desmond 5 years earlier. It's down. Desmond is down for 14 days, 13 days potentially avoided. Admittedly, there were different magnitude events, but also 4.5 million avoided in Schedule 8 costs. So in a couple of years, these things have paid for themselves, and over their lifetime will pay back way more. So I think from high level estimates, sort of 1 to 7 cost to benefit ratios. And my work's about basically saying, well, we've got a gap in the defence here, and we've got defences which aren't really at the quality that they ought to be. And given that Storm Desmond destroyed part of the defence and entered onto a line, can we not look to infill the gaps in those defences to stop water getting on? We've got 7 point operating equipment there, 7 train protection warning systems in there, all of which have to be replaced when it floods. Can we not also open up this culvert here, which goes underneath the car park, to drain out this flood water after the peak also? And again, we've got gaps through the defences here, which basically leads to water going on the line. And I think this could be the highest risk value service 1 section in the country from Lancaster to Scots border. So developing really the case there for resilience investment to effectively pay for itself and really to sort of open up some of these lost structures which let floodwater out and through the landscape. So the other thing that has happened is, and it hasn't helped, that more water has been routed upstream. Water generally doesn't like to flow uphill, and that aggravates some of the flood risk challenges. So actually, can we not look to reinstate the channels that flow downstream and drop the water level and try and reduce some of our challenges? And just to be realistic about the scale of how much water is coming down on these catchments, this is Mitford Dam in Northumberland, which I went to go and see when I worked in the Environment Agency. This is huge. The tailwater on this thing's two miles long when it fills up to the crest. It fills up to here and flows all the way backwards. And we're looking at huge volumes of water to capture in these catchments flowing down the Environment Agency network rail if we're to meaningfully resolve flood risk. And you look at places like Hess Bank, we've got the West Coast Main Line comes along this coastal section, and there's a defence here. And we have earthworks, but we also have flooding set to occur in the years ahead where we don't have defences. And when the railway was built, it looks like there may have been a little bit of the shoreline borrowed from the sea. And that presents vulnerability today. So we've got a defence here, but we've got areas of no defences, and we might need to put defences in, given that we've got level crossings here, and the trains come at high speed. I think the restriction here for speed is 110. So we've got this defence which has been worn away over the years from tidal action, and we also have these low spots near the level crossing, where actually we might need to look at some things. So the defended area, this is a track elevation, is quite high, but actually then drops near the level crossing and it is quite low further down. And these are the peak tide water levels. So further up the Morecambe branch line, which goes to Heysham Nuclear Power Station, is that seems to be being protected by third-party defences. But over here, we have a vulnerability to deal with potentially in the next big event. And this is the LiDAR, so just to show those low spots in the raised earthworks through there. And so colleagues are looking to renew this defence with large new boulders, huge in size to protect it. And that will make a difference and to the resilience. And in Carlisle, again, with things like the defences, there's probably a 1 to 7 benefit ratio of spending that money and the costs avoided of replacing the point operating equipment, the train protection warning systems. And actually, because it's the West Coast Main Line, should it actually be running? There's a feeling, my personal feeling is the train should be able to run if it's raining fairly heavy through there. It is the West Coast Main Line. So these things do pay for themselves. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour from me, really, in terms of projects have come close to and the resilience measures. And places like Hess Bank, I'm just starting to map out what the additional funding might look like for defending the level crossing area in the area where we have no defence, and potentially nature-based solutions like salt marsh work, what the cost might be, but also the benefits. And those are multiple benefits if we use things like nature-based solutions to carbon sequestration, as well as the benefits to the line itself. So yeah, my work's really in that sort of business planning space, about making things resilient for the future. I am running these workshops from every month, basically, with colleagues in Network Rail and also with colleagues in the train and freight operating companies and partners like the Environment Agency and local authority, to actually say, hey, these are the risks that I can see. What are the risks that you're aware of, and what can we do about them to increase performance and efficiency, and also increase the or manage safety effectively, so it's a safe and effective, reliable railway. So that's kind of my work in that space. And these slides in the background here show the actual Cumbrian coastal line. So everyone thinks about things like Dawlish, but actually, we've had huge lengths of track washed away on that coastal line. Here, that is the sea on the line near Furness Vale. And the next set of work I'm doing is looking at adaptation and resilience through that section. So I guess, like, what of the future? I think we are the stewards of today's railway. And I always think we should try and be good ancestors. So try and do the best that we can. This is definitely today's challenge, as the heat of today is probably underlining, and also how dry it has been. This is today's challenge, also tomorrow's, but it is the track beneath our feet today that we really need to get on top of, in terms of what we can do to invest to save, increase resilience. And the resilience is in our hands. It is within our gift to do this stuff, but we have to make the case for why that is important. And things like storytelling, photographs, evidence is really important to that. And I would also say that no person is an island entire of themselves, and I think that's really important to remember, that this is definitely has to be a collective effort. I am one climate adaptation specialist 4 days a week in a region covering Gretna to Euston. So I think there's definitely a huge scope for partnership work and collaboration to actually get that resilience delivered on the ground, and really develop a railway fit for the future, and which enhances the railway's reputation too. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour from myself, really, in terms of some of the heat challenges on the network, and particularly in terms of fire, but also some of the flood challenges on the West Coast main line. And really, it is crucial that artery route through the UK, given that we've got 75%, I gather, of the freight that arrives in Scotland comes by the West Coast main line, and I understand that there's no deep sea port in Scotland. So it's huge challenges up through that whole section. You've got Crewe, which is a flood risk, sections through Carlisle, and I know there's been a lot of noise about HS2 and other things, but actually, what about this existing network that we're managing now? Can we make that more effective and reliable for the future, particularly if we want the railways there to be a catalyst for growth, moving freight and passengers to where they need to be? So yeah, I'm conscious I've done 45 minutes of talking now, so I don't want to carry on and necessarily everyone hear my voice for the entire hour. I think it's probably a good point for me to bow out, pass back to the chair, and if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take those. And it's just also to say that there's no such thing as a silly question either, so I'm happy to answer anything I can. I'll get back to you if I can't answer it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michael, for a very inspiring presentation. Has anybody got any questions? I see we don't have any in the chat, so if you want to come off mute and ask any questions.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm Patrick Swainson. I'm the trainee CRE on the TRU project.
Okay.
I'm just wondered if you've got any examples of, because I'm interested in the sort of the simple flood control measures you previously used in sort of the Bolton area, Manchester area, that area. are there any examples of sort of simple kind of stormwater control measures off on third-party land that's been constructed and that have agreements to maintain to protect the railway? Because obviously in the railway corridor we're very restricted on what land we've got. Ideally we would provide sort of small scale protection higher up in the catchment. I'm interested to see if there's any examples of best practice of how you've.
Yeah, that's a good, really good question. So I think in terms of maintenance, I think these are nature-based solutions. So it's not. So some of them are actually growing. So it's probably argue it's probably more management. The good practice examples I'm aware of in Northwest and Central are the Thurmby Grange scheme. Try and post a link in the chat, and that's more linked to scour management, but actually in the future we are hoping to look at Shap and T-Bay for natural flood management, water retention upstream in the catchment. I think that's where third parties are really valuable, like the likes of the Rivers Trust and others, because what they can do is effectively be that intermediary and also bring in things like elms, or even you're seeing companies like Natural Capital Associates emerging now, so private finance to actually fund some of this stuff or co-fund it for resilience. And so at the moment, I can check with my colleague as to specifically NFMs, so water retention schemes, and also with Wales and Western colleagues if they've got any specific examples. The ones that I'm particularly aware of are Thurmby Grange, but also the Future Petterill project with the Rivers Trust in Carlisle, where we have Scour. I think I've only been here 2 years, but really keen to move forward on catchments like Shap and T-Bay to develop that approach. And I think it varies from site to site. I know having done this with organisations such as Rochdale Council and the Woodland Trust, there's various different approaches to it, and the CDM regs obviously do apply, but the CDM regs say things that health and safety pack has to be proportionate. So in the rail space, limited in short, Patrick, but if you search working with natural processes, Environment Agency, they've just released a new evidence base. There is natural flood management advisors at the Environment Agency as well. So they can also provide guidance and support. And along with that is the Natural England catchment sensitive farming officers. So I think it's really where things like the catchment-based approach is valuable to the railway, because if you work via those CABA groups, then it's bringing the farmers in, Natural England and all into a conversation. And it's probably a bit different to maybe how we conventionally work on the railway, but I think that's how you get that water retention upstream in the landscape. So I hope that answers your question, if not in a very roundabout way.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, it's obviously very, it's just getting these guys on board. Third party justifying it to them that it's to their own benefit as well as the railways, and it's just there are examples of those agreements. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I work with Anna Humphries as well, by the way, Patrick. So if you want to reach out to her or drop me an email or add me on LinkedIn, I can try and help where I can. More than happy to have a look if it's in my region, or refer you to the Eastern Region lead, Matt Lawrence.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks.
I think Richard got a question.
It was I actually worked with Mike. It was on the point that was last made by the previous speaker. We've got some slides, which is it maps out the partnerships, meta network rail regions and routes for the catchment partnerships, which we can supply, and then the case study for Thurmby Grange. I was on a call yesterday where this was presented, so I'll share those with Mike, and then he can sort of pass them on to you. I mean, he made the point about these third-party partnerships. They're really, really important. It basically, to get that spread of funding and bigger impacts. We're also working with the likes of United Utilities. We're hoping to get a collaboration there, So we're looking at some specific schemes in Manchester to do with SUDs, but also they're very keen to work with us for shared rainwater management, flood management, and stuff like that. So there are those opportunities, which hopefully the regional sustainable growth team can point you towards or facilitate as well. Okay.
Thanks for that, Richard. I think, yeah, it's a really valuable point that water companies have these huge combined sewer overflow challenges, but we've got these huge canopies covering our stations where we could conceivably collect an amount of water that they could avoid entering into their sewer and compounding excess surface water entering into the combined system, making some of those combined sewer overflow challenges harder. So yeah, it's yeah, I guess it's back to the point of the resilience is in our hands. We've just got to go and look for it and make the case for it.
Thanks, Richard. Any more questions?
I think it might be a legacy hand, or it might
Sorry,
not
that's a legacy hand.
I did have a question. You've mentioned about working with other public bodies, and then you did mention farmers. How have you found working with, private landowners, and how receptive are they to, storing water on their land? How do you make that case?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid question, and I think I'll just try and share my screen. I think Paul Quinn, is a guy I used to work with a lot. He's at the James Hutton Institute now, and he was the EFRA, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Special Advisor on future flooding. I think the important thing to remember is that he calls it the 5% future. So we're only after like 5% of their land for 5% of a given year. These measures fill and empty really quickly. This is water that comes on the landscape and passes off. So it's not always sat like this. Most of the year it's like this. So most landowners are good landowners. I mean, they have got headwinds at the moment for sure, food prices, all the other stuff that's going on. But I think most people are fairly conscientious. I think it's the installation of the natural flood management is the quick bit, is my experience. The long bit is all the pre-work that gets to that stage, and then the work around like the handover, the handback around the health and safety file and all those things. So I think that is the thing to mention to them, is that we're not flooding your land all the time, but also there's benefits. So the Woodland Trust had a great guide about trees in the farm landscape. So shading, if we're hot, the sheep are going to be hot for sure, because they've got big woolly coats on. So they actually, like things like trees, farmers, because it shades their cattle. And also selfishly for them, they're just farming the land, not selfishly, but they're business people. So they look at things in terms of returns. And sure, planting trees are slow return, but actually timber price is some of the highest it's been. So it's 50 quid, I think, 50 quid about 10 years ago when I last looked, for the price of softwood. So there's an argument about actually, if you did agroforestry or strips, then that can be thinned. So it's a source of wood fuel for log burners. Now it's a controversial point, but a lot of farmers do still use those things in rural areas. So it's selling it in terms of their farm. And I think also, do they want to be losing their topsoil off the land like this slide shows here? I wouldn't want to be losing that topsoil, given that phosphate costs a fortune at the moment, and actually, like, by sometimes farming a little less intensively, you actually get more in a weird way, because less feed, those sorts of things, and fundamentally it's about underlying all that as a compliance and liability point of view, that actually farmland shouldn't be flooding other people's land. But I think that would be my last point of conversation with any farmer. It's about working collaboratively. So yeah, I think every landowner is different for sure, and I think you just have to work with who's willing, and that can be frustrating, because sometimes hydrologically where you want to intervene isn't where you can always intervene. But if you could find someone who says yes and is willing, and build the momentum from there, because what you often find is it's farmers looking over fences at other farmers, and the sort of snowball effect really from there on. Does that answer your question, David?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. I remember when I was working with Transport for Greater Manchester building the airport line, and we did quite a bit of work with the golf courses near the Mersey.
Yeah.
And they were complaining at the time about how flat the amount of land they needed to basically retain water, and obviously they're just upstream of the outfall into the Mersey. I think they're worried about. There wasn't so much land lost really, but it's the amount of work they needed to do to, retain water on the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's about communication, isn't it? I think as well,
Yeah.
because when you have the defence so high up, like 7 meters of water trapped behind the defence, that's when that goes. That's a real liability to manage. But whereas if you take away, it might be more often, but less ferociously, and actually fertilise the land. So yeah, that's an interesting one that you worked on that patch. I run around there sometimes as well. So small world.
Right, and any other questions? I did have another question actually. It was you mentioned about building the business case. I was wondering how you find that obviously there's more pressure these days for tighter funding for infrastructure, and how you build a case for an event which could happen in a number of years and I know it's happening more and more frequently, but how you build the business case based on events, the probability of events.
I think it's looking back and then looking forward. So I think with the signal cabinets thing's a really good example, but is that enough? I'd argue it's a great start, but it's not the end. It's not problem solved, walked away. The fact that we're every few years in Carlisle, we're basically replacing TPWS, POE, isn't great and costs money. And actually, for just small investments in defences, how much that costs, will pay for itself within the years ahead. So it's similar but different to things like solar panels, isn't it? There's a payback period there, but also it's not just about the asset recovery, it's about the Schedule 8 as well. So that the money then and the disruption that goes with that. So when you stack the disbenefits of doing nothing against the benefits of doing something, you realise that the business case is increasingly strong. And I'm just starting out on that journey, in honesty, David, making those cases. But we surely should be doing this. Is my feeling, given some of these routes are strategically significant in the network.
Well, thanks for that. We're almost up to the hours. Have we got any more questions?
Silence is a no, David.
Well, thanks for a really fascinating presentation. It's really good. You gave the local perspective and also from your personal perspective as well. And I think it's very inspiring, and it shows a lot of leadership in working with all these bodies, and you've really demonstrated it's a real collective effort that's required to adapt, and also to also show that there are ways forward. It isn't all doom and gloom, that with these natural flood management, we can really make a big difference. So it's a very fascinating presentation. Anything else?
No, thank you for having me too as well. It's glad to come along and meet you all, and hopefully speak again in the future at some point, and maybe we cross paths again.
Thanks very much. Can we show thanks in the usual way?
Everyone's